In 1943, a German weapons engineer named Hugo Schmeisser did something that would change warfare forever. He created a weapon so revolutionary that when Adolf Hitler first saw it, he ordered it banned, not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. This weapon was so far ahead of its time that armies around the world wouldn't catch up for another 20 years. The AK-47 copied it, the M16 inspired by it. Every modern assault rifle you see today, they all owe their existence to this one German innovation that was supposed to stay secret. But here's the twist. The Germans abandoned it. They had the future of warfare in their hands and let it slip away. Today, we're diving deep into the story of the Sturmgewehr 44, the world's first true assault rifle, and uncovering why this weapon was literally decades ahead of its time. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how one gun changed military history forever, and why the US military fought against adopting this technology for 20 years, even though they knew it was superior. Let's get into it. To understand why the STG-44 was so revolutionary, we need to go back to World War I. Picture this. It's 1916, you're in a trench somewhere in France, and you're holding a bolt action rifle. The Mauser 98K, the Lee Enfield, the Springfield 1903. These were the weapons that dominated the battlefield. Now, these rifles were incredibly accurate. You could hit a target 500, even 800 yards away. But here's the problem. Between each shot, you had to manually work the bolt, pull it back, eject the spent casing, push it forward, chamber a new round. In the chaos of combat, most soldiers could fire maybe 15 rounds per minute if they were well trained. And then you had machine guns. The MG-34, the Browning M2. These things could spit out 600 to 1,200 rounds per minute. Absolutely devastating. But they weighed anywhere from 25 to 80 pounds with the tripod and ammunition. You needed a whole crew to operate them, and they weren't exactly mobile. So you had this massive gap in firepower. Long-range, slow-firing rifles on one end, heavy, crew-served machine guns on the other, nothing in between. And here's something that blew military minds when they finally studied it. After World War I, analysts looked at where most combat actually happened. Guess what they found? The vast majority of infantry engagements took place within 300 yards. Some studies showed that 90% of all combat happened inside 400 meters. Think about that for a second. Soldiers were carrying rifles designed to shoot accurately at 800 yards, but most firefights happened at a quarter of that distance. It was like showing up to a street race with a Formula One car. Technically impressive, but completely wrong for the job. By World War II, this problem became critical for the Germans. On the Eastern Front, they were fighting the Soviet Union, and the Russians had something the Germans didn't, the PPH-41 submachine gun. This thing fired pistol rounds at 900 rounds per minute, and the Soviets produced them by the millions. German soldiers with their Kar-98K bolt action rifles were getting overwhelmed in close quarters combat. By the time a German soldier worked his bolt and chambered another round, a Soviet soldier with a PPSH could pump out 10 or 15 rounds. Sure, the Germans had the MP-40 submachine gun. You've seen it in every World War II movie. But submachine guns had their own limitation. They fired pistol ammunition. The 9mm rounds from an MP-40 were only effective up to about 100 yards. Beyond that, they just didn't have the power or accuracy. So here's what German commanders were dealing with. They needed something that could fire rapidly like a submachine gun for close combat, but still had the range and power of a rifle for medium-distance engagements. They needed a weapon that one soldier could carry and operate effectively anywhere from 10 yards to 400 yards. They needed something that didn't exist yet. And that's where our story really begins. Enter Hugo Schmeisser. Now, this guy was weapons design royalty. His father, Louis Schmeisser, had designed the legendary MP-18, one of the world's first practical submachine guns used in World War I. Hugo grew up in this world, breathing firearms technology from childhood. By the early 1940s, Hugo was working for C.G. Haenel, a German weapons manufacturer, and he was obsessed with solving this firepower gap problem. But he wasn't alone. The German military had issued a challenge to weapons designers across the country: create an intermediate weapon. Here's where it gets technical, but stay with me because this is crucial. The breakthrough wasn't just about the gun itself, it was about the ammunition. Standard rifle rounds like the 8mm Mauser were incredibly powerful. They were designed to reach out and touch someone at 1,000 yards, but that power came with massive recoil. When you fired on full automatic with full power rifle rounds, the weapon would climb up, and to the right, so violently that you'd be shooting at the clouds after 3 rounds. Pistol rounds, on the other hand, had very little recoil, which is why submachine guns were controllable on full auto, but they just didn't have the range or the stopping power. Schmeisser's genius was realizing, what if we created something in between? What if we took a rifle round and shortened it, reduced the powder charge, and created an intermediate cartridge? And that's exactly what he did. He developed the 7.92 middleweight Kurz round. Kurz means short in German. This cartridge was shorter than a full rifle round, but larger than a pistol round. It had enough power to be effective out to 400 yards, but not so much recoil that you couldn't control it on full automatic. This was revolutionary. Nobody had really done this before, and it was the key to everything that followed. In 1942, Schmeisser and his team unveiled their prototype, the Machine & Karabiner 42, or MKB 42. It was a select-fire weapon, meaning it could shoot semi-automatic, 1 round per trigger pull, or fully automatic. It fed from a 30-round detachable magazine. It weighed about 11 pounds, fully loaded, light enough for one soldier to carry comfortably. The military tested it, and the results were stunning. Soldiers loved it. It was accurate, reliable, and gave infantry unprecedented firepower. One soldier with an MKB-42 could do the work of 3 soldiers with traditional bolt-action rifles. But there was a problem. A big one. Adolf Hitler hated it. Yeah, you heard that right. When Hitler found out about this new weapon, he was furious. He had specifically ordered that production should focus on existing weapons, not experimental designs. Germany was already stretched thin with resources, and Hitler believed that the traditional Mauser rifle and MG-42 machine gun were sufficient. He ordered all development stopped. The project was dead. But here's where it gets interesting. The generals on the Eastern Front knew better. They had seen what this weapon could do. They knew it could save German lives and turn the tide in crucial battles. So they did something that could have gotten them shot. They ignored Hitler's orders. They worked with weapons manufacturers to continue production in secret, disguising it with different designations and paperwork. They called it the Maschinenpistole 43, or MP-43, making it sound like just another submachine gun to avoid scrutiny. And then they started quietly shipping these weapons to the front lines without Hitler's knowledge. By 1943, soldiers on the Eastern Front were using these weapons in combat, and the results spoke for themselves. Units equipped with the MP-43 were significantly more effective in combat. Their casualty rates dropped, their success rates in engagements went up. Word got back to Berlin, and eventually it got to Hitler. In 1944, Hitler visited the front lines and saw soldiers using these mysterious new weapons. He asked what they were. When he learned the truth, that his orders had been disobeyed, there was a moment where everyone thought heads were going to roll. But then something unexpected happened. Hitler asked for a demonstration. He watched soldiers fire the weapon. He saw the tactical advantages firsthand, and he completely changed his mind. Not only did he approve the weapon, but he also personally renamed it. He called it the Sturmgewehr, which means assault rifle. The STG-44 was born. Hitler even prioritized its production, ordering hundreds of thousands to be manufactured. But by then, it was 1944. Germany was losing the war. The Soviet Union was pushing from the east, the Allies from the west. It was too little, too late. So what exactly made the STG-44 so special? Why do I keep saying it was 20 years ahead of its time? Let's break down the innovations that made this weapon a game changer. We touched on this earlier, but it's worth diving deeper. Before the STG-44, military thinking was binary. Rifles with full power cartridges for long range, or submachine guns with pistol cartridges for close range. The intermediate cartridge concept shattered that paradigm. The 7.92 33 mm Kurz round gave you 80% of the rifle performance at ranges where 90% of combat actually occurred, with dramatically reduced weight and recoil. A soldier could carry 180 rounds of Kurz ammunition for the same weight as 90 rounds of full rifle ammunition. That's double the ammunition capacity. Think about what that means tactically. Your soldiers can stay in the fight longer, suppress enemies more effectively, and have more flexibility in engagement ranges. It's a complete tactical revolution based on one simple insight. Optimize for how combat actually happens, not for theoretical maximum range. The STG-44 had a selector switch that let you choose between semi-automatic and fully automatic fire. This sounds simple now, but in 1943, this was groundbreaking for a rifle caliber weapon. Need to take a careful shot at 300 yards? Switch to semi-auto for precision. Enemy squad rushing your position at 50 yards? Flip to full auto and lay down suppressive fire. One weapon, multiple tactical applications. The STG-44 used a 30-round detachable curved magazine. You could swap out empty magazines in seconds. This was standard on submachine guns, but relatively new for rifles. Compare this to the Mauser 98K, which had an internal 5-round magazine that you had to load 1 round at a time or with stripper clips. In the middle of a firefight, that's a death sentence. With the STG-44, you just dropped the empty mag, slapped in a fresh one, and you were back in the fight. Here's one that often gets overlooked. Traditional rifles like the Mauser were beautiful pieces of machinery with milled receivers and precisely machined parts. They were expensive and time-consuming to produce. The STG-44 used stamped sheet metal for much of its construction. This was cheaper, faster to manufacture, and honestly, more practical for a combat weapon. You could produce 3 STG-44s in the time it took to make one traditional rifle. This manufacturing innovation would influence weapon design for decades. The AK-47 heavily uses stamped steel. Modern AR-15s, many use stamped components. Schmeisser's manufacturing techniques became industry standard. But here's what really set the STG-44 apart. It wasn't just a collection of features. It was a complete system designed from the ground up around a new tactical philosophy. Every element worked together. The intermediate cartridge reduced recoil, which made automatic fire controllable, which justified the select fire capability, which required the high-capacity magazine, which needed to be detachable for quick reloads, which worked because the stamped steel construction kept weight manageable. It was a holistic approach to weapons design that considered manufacturing, logistics, ammunition supply, soldier ergonomics, and tactical doctrine all at once. This integrated thinking was decades ahead of its time. Let's put this in perspective. In 1944, American infantry were carrying M1 Garands, great rifles, semi-automatic, 8-round internal magazine, but they fired full power, 30.06 rounds, weighed over 11 pounds loaded, and you couldn't reload until you'd fired all 8 rounds or manually ejected the clip. British soldiers had Lee Enfield bolt actions. Russians had Mosin Nagants, also bolt action. The Japanese had Arisaka rifles, again bolt action. And here were German soldiers with a weapon that could select between semi and full auto fire, held 30 rounds in a detachable magazine, was effective from 10 to 400 yards, and could be operated effectively by a single infantryman. The tactical advantage was enormous. One German soldier with an STG-44 could put out more effective fire than 3 soldiers with bolt-action rifles. In defensive positions, a squad with these weapons could hold off forces twice their size. Historical analysis after the war showed that German units equipped with the STG-44 had significantly better combat performance than units with traditional small arms, even when outnumbered and undersupplied. But here's the tragedy. Germany only produced about 450,000 of them before the war ended. Compare that to the millions of Mauser rifles or MP-40 submachine guns. The STG-44 came too late to change Germany's fate in the war. However, it came just in time to change the entire future of infantry combat. May 8th, 1945. Germany surrenders. World War II in Europe is over. And immediately, a new conflict begins. The scramble for German technology. The Americans, British, French, and Soviets all knew that Germany had been ahead in several technological areas: rockets, jets, and small arms. Teams of intelligence officers and military experts fanned out across occupied Germany, looking for weapons, blueprints, and engineers. The Soviets got to Hugo Schmeisser first. In 1945, Schmeisser and many of his engineers were invited to the Soviet Union. And by invited, I mean they were essentially compelled to work for the Soviet weapons industry. Schmeisser spent years in the USSR, working on weapons projects. During the same period, a young Soviet weapons designer named Mikhail Kalashnikov was working on a new rifle design. Now, here's where we need to talk about one of the most controversial topics in firearms history. Did Kalashnikov copy the STG-44? The official Soviet and later Russian position has always been that Kalashnikov independently designed the AK-47. They point out that the internal mechanisms are different. The gas system works differently. The receiver construction is different. And they're technically correct. The AK-47's internal operating system is distinct from the STG-44. But let's be real here. Look at the overall configuration. Both use intermediate cartridges. Both are select fire. Both use 30-round detachable curved magazines. Both weigh about 10-11 pounds loaded. Both use stamped steel construction in their later versions. And both have very similar effective ranges and tactical applications. More importantly, they both represent the exact same tactical philosophy. Give infantry a lightweight, controllable automatic weapon optimized for the ranges where combat actually occurs. The timing is suspicious too. Hugo Schmeisser was in the Soviet Union from 1945 to 1952. The AK-47 prototype appeared in 1946 and was adopted in 1949. Kalashnikov certainly had access to captured STG-44s and their technical documentation. Did Kalashnikov directly copy the STG-44? Probably not mechanically. But was he inspired by it? Did he benefit from German research and the intermediate cartridge concept? Absolutely, 100%. The Soviets were studying German weapons technology extensively, and Schmeisser's team was right there in the USSR. Some historians have called the AK-47 a conceptual descendant of the STG-44. That's probably the most accurate description. Kalashnikov took Schmeisser's revolutionary ideas about what an infantry rifle should be and implemented them with different mechanical solutions. And you know what? It worked spectacularly. The AK-47 became the most produced firearm in history, with over 100 million units manufactured worldwide. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States was having a very different reaction to the assault rifle concept. American military leadership in the late 1940s and early 1950s was dominated by World War II veterans who believed in the supremacy of marksmanship and long-range rifle fire. They looked at the STG-44 and said, "Cute, but we won the war with the M1 Garand, so clearly our approach is correct." In 1954, the US adopted the M14 rifle. It was essentially a full auto-capable version of the M1 Garand, still firing the full-power 7.62 to 51mm NATO cartridge. It was accurate at long range, well made, and completely missed the point of what modern infantry combat required. The M14 was controllable on full auto for about 2 rounds, after which the recoil would have you shooting at the stratosphere. It was heavy, the ammunition was heavy, and soldiers couldn't carry nearly as much of it. Then came Vietnam. American soldiers with M14s were facing Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces armed with AK-47s and SKS rifles. In the jungles and rice paddies of Southeast Asia, most engagements happened at close to medium range, exactly the scenario the assault rifle concept was designed for. And the Americans were getting outgunned. The enemy could spray automatic fire effectively, while American soldiers struggled with the M14's excessive recoil on full auto. The M14 was superior at 500 yards, but most firefights happened at 50 to 200 yards. It took Vietnam to finally convince the US military that maybe, just maybe, the Germans had been onto something 20 years earlier. Enter the M16. Designed by Eugene Stoner, the M16 used a small-caliber, high-velocity intermediate cartridge, the 5.56 45 mm. The British SA-80, the French FAMAs, the Chinese QBZ-95, the Israeli Taver, the Belgian Scar. They all use intermediate cartridges, select fire capability, detachable magazines, and are optimized for engagement ranges of 10 to 400 yards. They're all descendants of the STG-44. Every single one of them owes their existence to Hugo Schmeisser's revolutionary thinking in 1942. So here's the question that probably bugs you as much as it bugs me. If the STG-44 was so revolutionary, so superior to everything else, why did the Germans abandon it? Why didn't it become the dominant weapon of World War II? The answer is a combination of timing, resources, and strategic decisions. The STG-44 wasn't officially approved and mass-produced until 1944. By that point, Germany was already losing the war on multiple fronts. The Soviets had turned the tide at Stalingrad in 1943. The Allies had landed in Italy. D-Day was coming. Germany needed millions of rifles for their military. They had tooling in factories set up to produce Mauser 98K rifles and MP-40 submachine guns. Retooling those factories to produce STG-44s would have taken time and resources Germany simply didn't have. So even though the STG-44 was superior, they couldn't produce enough of them quickly enough to make a strategic difference. It's like inventing the iPhone in 2007, but not being able to build more than 450,000 units total. Great technology, but insufficient scale. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Introducing a new weapon isn't just about manufacturing the guns. You need to manufacture the ammunition, distribute it to every unit, train soldiers on the new weapon, and maintain supply lines. Germany was already producing millions of rounds of 8mm Mauser ammunition and 9mm ammunition. Adding a third cartridge type, the 7.9233mm Kurz, complicated their logistics at a time when their supply chains were already stretched to the breaking point. By 1944 and 45, Germany was losing territory, factories were being bombed, and transportation networks were collapsing. Introducing a new ammunition type was logistically problematic. We talked about this earlier, but it's worth emphasizing. Hitler's initial ban on the project cost Germany at least a year, maybe 2, of potential development and production time. If the STG-44 had been approved and mass-produced starting in 1942, Germany was also pouring resources into other weapons projects. V-2 rockets, jet fighters like the Me-262, the advanced U-boats, and heavy tanks. The Nazi leadership was obsessed with wonder weapons that they believed would turn the tide of the war. The STG-44, as revolutionary as it was still just an infantry rifle. It wasn't as flashy as a jet fighter or a ballistic missile. Resources that could have gone into producing more STG-44s instead went into projects like the WWII rocket program, which consumed enormous resources and had minimal strategic impact. But here's the real question. What if Germany had recognized the STG-44's potential earlier? What if they had started mass production in 1942 instead of 1944? Let's think through this scenario. Imagine German infantry divisions on the Eastern Front in 1942-43, all equipped with assault rifles. Every soldier with the firepower of 3 rifle-armed soldiers, better suppression capability, more flexibility in combat, improved defensive capabilities. Would it have changed the outcome of the war? Probably not. Germany faced insurmountable strategic problems, fighting a two-front war, facing enemies with vastly superior industrial capacity, and making catastrophic strategic decisions at the highest levels. But it would have made the war bloodier and longer. Allied casualties would have been significantly higher. The timeline of the war might have been extended. We might be talking about World War II ending in late 1945 or even 1946 instead of May 1945. The abandonment of the STG-44 is one of history's great what-ifs. Not because it would have won the war for Germany, but because it shows how even revolutionary technology can be wasted through poor timing, bureaucratic resistance, and strategic failures. After the war, neither the Western Allies nor the Soviets wanted to give Germany credit for innovations like the assault rifle. The Cold War was beginning, and both sides wanted to claim technological superiority. The Soviets promoted the AK-47 as a purely Soviet innovation. The Americans eventually developed the M16, but rarely acknowledged the German influence. Hugo Schmeisser's contributions were downplayed or ignored in Western military histories for decades. It's only in recent years that historians and weapons experts have given the STG-44 its proper place in history as the first true assault rifle and the weapon that defined modern infantry combat. Today, if you look at any military force anywhere in the world, they're carrying descendants of the STG-44. The concept that Hugo Schmeisser pioneered in 1942, that was abandoned by Germany in their desperate final years, became the global standard for infantry weapons. That's what I mean when I say the STG-44 was 20 years ahead of its time. It presented a complete vision of modern infantry combat that the world-is militaries took 2 decades to fully accept and implement. So let's bring this all together. The STG-44 was revolutionary because it solved a fundamental problem in military tactics. It recognized that most combat happens at medium ranges, and that soldiers need flexible, controllable firepower more than they need extreme long-range precision. The intermediate cartridge, the select fire capability, the high-capacity detachable magazine, the stamped steel construction, these weren't just features. They were a complete rethinking of what an infantry weapon should be. The timeline is striking. 1942, STG-44 concept developed. 1944, STG-44 officially adopted by Germany. 1947, Soviet Union develops AK-47. 1954, US adopts M14, still using full power cartridges. By 1964, US finally adopts M16 with intermediate cartridge. 1970s, 1980s, assault rifle concept becomes global standard. 20 years from concept to global acceptance. That's how far ahead the STG-44 was. Hugo Schmeisser lived until 1953. He returned to Germany from the Soviet Union in 1952 and died shortly after. He never received widespread recognition for his contributions to military technology during his lifetime. His innovation was overshadowed by the war it emerged from and the Cold War that followed. But his legacy lives on in every assault rifle ever made. Today, over 500 million assault rifles exist worldwide. From the AK-47 and its variants to the M16 family, from the German G36 to the Japanese Type 89, every single one of them follows the template that Schmeisser created. Original STG-44s are rare and valuable today. Museums display them as revolutionary artifacts. Collectors pay tens of thousands of dollars for authentic examples. They're recognized as one of the most important firearms in history. The story of the STG-44 teaches us several lessons about innovation in warfare. First, recognizing a problem is just as important as solving it. German military analysts correctly identified that most combat happened at medium ranges, not extreme distances. That insight drove everything else. Second, revolutionary ideas often face resistance from established thinking. Hitler's initial rejection of the STG-44 and the US military's 20-year refusal to adopt the assault rifle concept show how institutional inertia can delay progress even when the evidence is overwhelming. Third, timing matters enormously. The STG-44 came too late to help Germany, but just in time to influence the entire post-war world. Sometimes being first isn't enough. You also need the right circumstances. Fourth, no single weapon wins wars. The STG-44 was tactically superior, but Germany still lost World War II because of strategic failures, resource shortages, and fighting too many enemies at once. Technology is important, but it's not everything. And finally, good ideas persist. Even though Germany abandoned the STG-44, even though it was produced in relatively small numbers, even though it was on the losing side of history, the concepts it embodied eventually conquered the world. Today's soldiers, whether they're American Marines carrying M4 carbines, Russian soldiers with AK-74Ms, or German Bundeswehr troops with G-36s, are all using weapons based on principles established by Hugo Schmeisser 80 years ago. The Sturmgewehr 44, a weapon so advanced that it arrived before the world was ready for it, abandoned by the nation that created it, copied by its enemies, and ultimately vindicated as the template for modern infantry combat. 20 years ahead of its time, and still influential 8 decades later. That's the story of the weapon that changed warfare forever. If you enjoyed this deep dive into military history and technology, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. We've got videos on other revolutionary weapons, military innovations, and historical mysteries that changed the world. Drop a comment and let me know, if you could go back and change one decision in the STG-44's development, what would it be? And what other weapons or military technology would you like to see covered on this channel? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.